Hello, everyone. I'm Adrian Sanabria, host of the Enterprise Security Weekly podcast and founder of the Defenders Initiative. Welcome to this webcast sponsored by Oasis. I have two folks joining me today. The first is Shahar Zaguri, Director of Product Management at Oasis Security. How are you, Shahar?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. And we were just commenting on how lovely that background is with the lit up company sign there and everything. It looks amazing.
Thank you.
Also joining us is Hans Vargas, Data Protection Lead at Marathon Petroleum. How are you doing, Hans?
I'm doing great.
And now is maybe a good opportunity. I think you want to give a bit of a employer disclaimer as well.
Oh, sure. Yes. Hans Vargas. I'm Data Protection Lead, and I have some experience in obviously the private sector, some government. And one of the things I wanted to say is I'm coming on my own. I guess I'm not representing my employer, so I just want to make that clear. My opinions are mine and only mine. And hopefully this is a great conversation. I'm very excited about it.
Awesome. All right. Yeah. And for that conversation today, we're going to talk about non-human identity lifecycle governance. And we're probably not going to say non-human identity too much on this webcast. We're going to start shortening it to NHI. So every time we say NHI, just so everyone's clear, we're talking about non-human identities. All right. So let's jump into it. So first off, Hans, I'll come to you for this. What do you think of when I say non-human identities?
Well, I think we hear that as a group of what I understand is service accounts. We're starting to see more and more of this. We see automation as being driver of how do we create some of these non-human accounts, NHIs. Driving some of those workloads. And that's as exciting as it is because it's enabling faster processing. It's also, if I put my governance hat, there are some things that, they're not necessarily attached because there is not necessarily a human in the loop. And I think visibility, as we discussed, is going to be one of those things that in the umbrella of governance is going to perhaps let us leverage this even better. And maybe potentially avoid some of the pitfalls that we've seen happening in the industry.
Yeah, sure. So as an ex-penetration tester, I think of non-human identities as those things that I find in scripts that allow me to log into things and get access to things. And, as a pen tester, have a lot of fun in your environment while you're unaware of what I'm doing. Shahar, like how do you see non-human identities? Obviously, this is what a big part of what Oasis does, but it's such a broad term, and I've heard it said that there's I don't know how many more non-human identities than human identities out there now, like billions and billions, like maybe 30 non-human identities for every human, right?
True. So to add to what Hans said, basically, you can think of a non-human identity as a digital identity that is used by like a software, service, machine, not by people. So they represent applications, workloads, scripts, APIs, bots, agentic AI identities. So all of those are kind of represent non-human identities that basically need to authenticate to get access to resources in order to function, right? So to give an example, let's say a GCP service account that allow an app to read or write from a storage bucket, or an API key or a token, for example. Let's take an example, a GitHub action workflow that using an API to deploy code for AWS, for example. So those all are non-human identities. The most common one, of course, are the service accounts, and we know the legacy ones better than the new ones, but we also have SAS tokens and things that are not very kind of popular when saying non-human identities. But and basically, yeah, there are much more non-human identities than human. They're exponentially growing, especially with the AI era, So yeah, definitely something to talk about.
All right, now we've kind of cleared that up. I want to do some quick housekeeping for the audience here. Welcome. And you'll notice there's some blue buttons down below. The first one there is the chat button, so you can ask questions there. If you didn't understand any of that, or you still have questions about what non-human identities are, feel free to drop your questions in there. I'll be checking it throughout the conversation here. So don't wait until the end to ask your questions. You can ask while we're talking about this stuff. I think it's often better to answer these questions in the context of the conversation, because sometimes by the time we get to the end of the podcast, somebody's question doesn't make sense, or the webcast, somebody's question doesn't make sense at the end because we've lost that context. Also, there's a handouts button there, and there's 3 PDFs there that tell you more about Oasis and what they do. You can grab those at any time. I'll remind you again before we finish that those PDFs are there, but feel free to grab them now. Maybe one of your questions comes out of something that's in one of those PDFs. There's some stats and some other details in there that you could ask questions about. All right, and back to the conversation here. I think Shahar, I'm going to come to you with this, but what are some of the common roles? Who do you interact with when talking about non-human identities? Who are the folks in the organization that tend to use these and might get a lot of value out of this conversation?
So basically, there's a lot of personas tied into that. We have the DevOps teams that are facilitators and the main users of those type of identities. There are the security engineering that cares about security and how they maintaining kind of the risk reduction around those identity. Compliance and GRC people that care about auditing, and we see the rise of kind of compliance frameworks like PCI that incorporating NHIs within their frameworks. We also have like the engineering teams, right? The developers that creating those identities and using them on their daily basis and putting them in their code, the credentials, and makes a lot of problems to the organization and the way they're utilizing them. So there are many aspects and many personas that kind of tied into it. I think those are the main ones. Of course, we also have like application owners, as we call it in here. It's like the people that requiring those identities in order to use specific applications or processes of their needs. So many personas in the organization, but I think that's the top of mind.
Yeah. And Hans, one of the things we talk about in a lot of these webcasts is just the importance of creating relationships with other parts of the organization. Obviously, there are very few things that security can fix without help, that they can fix on their own. When you think non-human identities, what groups are you normally having to build rapport with and work with? Is it mostly the application security folks or the developers, DevOps folks? Who should we be looking to create relationships and rapport with to tackle this problem?
I think some of them already been mentioned, and Shahar has made a good job trying to pinpoint the ones I can think of on the top of my head always, right? The developers, engineers, including governance and audit. But I've also seen in the last years this socialization of this type of activities. Think about the robotic process automation is empowering the end user to leverage these processes. And Shahar has also mentioned agentic AI, where we are starting to see more of this being pushed to the end user. So it's not only the proliferation of these type of accounts, but it's because we're trying to empower the end user to do more. or to focus on more tasks. So I think it's not limited, and I think we're starting to see the beginning of this boom. Identities in our concept of identity, sometimes we have historically associated with a human, and now the discussion is leading towards, we have not only service accounts but also have devices. When we think now in terms of securing, we're not thinking of the traditional way we used to, just putting a firewall, but we're trying to identify the identities of something, not necessarily human. And we see the ratio is many more non-human identities to humans. So I think we're just at the beginning of a transformation where the benefits of this are going to be sold really rapidly, and we're going to be catching up a little bit on how do we protect actually these identities that are connected, interconnected, sharing information, accessing information. And that's a topic that is really close to my heart because I'm trying to protect that, maybe catching up on the back. How do we collaborate, not only with the end user, but all the other ones we mentioned so far? The IAM team, the developers, because all of them are accessing data. We want faster access to that data to data analytics purposes, for security purposes, for business reasons. And so I think if we make a list, it's going to be, in my opinion, is going to be a lot more people than we thought.
Yeah. Yeah, it's some very good points there. And when I think about, when people talk about AI replacing jobs, like for example, I think there's a big misunderstanding there of what a job is versus a task. I think when most people talk about using AI, they're thinking about automating tasks that people do in their job, right? Their job is a lot like a programmer, like that's the famous example, right? And you talk to a programmer, you find out writing code is only like 10% of what they do or less. So you're not replacing their job. You're making a task that they do faster, and it's less than a tenth of what they do. But your point of it being very end user focused, a lot of those tasks are tasks that are done at desktops and laptops. And we're even seeing all the big tech companies with AI technology with some kind of computer vision product, right? For all the things that don't have APIs, now this thing needs to move a mouse and, enter keystrokes and fill out forms and things like that. And all those things are going to require some kind of token, some kind of API keys, right? Like more and more of these things floating around. Is you're smiling? Am I? Is this a familiar topic for you?
Yeah, definitely is. This is something that is really top of mind for us because from the moment that AI got into the point. So first of all, as Hans mentioned, and I totally agree, you are basically the non-human identities are also got bigger and bigger due to the fact that we have the AI, but also you accelerate the work of many employees that never got to be a user of or an owner of a non-human identity before. So now it's not only your engineering team or DevOps team, but it's basically the entire organization that leveraging non-human identities behind those AIs, right? And this is another topic to secure in the head of NHIs because it's just spreading the problem to become much wider than it was already. So yeah, I totally agree with that, and I think that one of the things that we are talking a lot with our customers is that they actually are like I feel like that in a lot of organizations they care about their velocity, they care about moving fast, they care about how they can expedite processes within the organization, and suddenly all of that security aspect of the non-human identity and putting guardrails and security processes and governance processes around that, it's kind of intimidating, right? Because I'm losing kind of my speed and velocity, and the teams need now to go through all these kind of processes. And you talked about which kind of teams we need in order to help us to secure those identities. And I think we need to be also in the mindset of not only how they are helping us, but if we want to secure our NHIs, what's in it for them? How can we make sure that we are not making them slower or making their life harder? So the processes and the governance pieces needs to also consider the end users that are now everyone in the company, and how do you enable them to follow up those processes in a matter of like, we want to help and we want like make it a more motivated for them. So that's another kind of point to think of when you kind of go into that aspect.
Yeah. That door has definitely been, been closed for security. The idea of using it or not using it, like that's just, that's gone now. It's even the most conservative organizations I've seen are just diving into AI in ways that have really kind of shocked me. How quickly they're doing it. They're skipping security processes, and we're seeing the results of some of that in the news, right? We've seen some cases where, maybe they should have done a pen test there. Maybe they should have done some more due diligence before releasing some of this stuff. But I also want to talk about, I mentioned early on that NHIs are one of my favorite things to find during a penetration test. And we do have a lot of examples with attacks going after these. And one in particular I want to mention are info stealers. It's one of the most popular new kinds of malware, and they're even targeting Macs because, who has the NHIs on their laptops? It's the engineers, the developers, right? And so because they're using Macs, we now have this info stealer malware targeting Macs, and they're looking for the token you've logged into Slack with. They're looking for AWS API keys. They're looking for all these credentials and identities that might be floating around on that person's laptop. So is this, Hans, I'm going to come to you. How top of mind is this? Is this something that you're seeing a lot, like something that's keeping you up, that you have to worry about? Is this data being stolen off of people's systems?
I think we've seen it on the news. There are plenty of examples so far, and yes, I sleep okay, right? But I don't have any more hair to pull. And compromise of accounts, it is one of those typical things that we see: social engineering, compromise of API keys, how that leads to lateral movement, data exfiltration. For the typical thing that we see is economic gain, through ransomware. We also seen that since we are so interconnected anymore, just targeting your supply chain, second party, third party, it's becoming a much higher risk that companies and security professionals like me have to think about. And some of that is also on us. The thing we've seen examples after examples of misconfiguration of these services, of these capabilities. So it's not necessarily restricted to some of these, developers misconfiguring. It could be end users too, because I've seen examples even in the news lately that something that it could be if it was not used appropriately or it was not blocked appropriately has led to a massive detrimental cyber attack, or is a reputation damage to a company. And sometimes that's simple as that. Knowing that you might be in the what they call publicly traded, you have to notify this. At least in the U.S., you have to say that we got the problem here, compared to some other companies that maybe can hide behind paying a ransomware and then moving on.
Right.
True.
Right. Yeah, and it's Yeah, and one of the things I'm really noticing in this conversation is this isn't really like something that just happens in the cloud, right? This is it has become very personal. I think there's one case where I heard of the attackers getting access to the engineer's laptop because of something that was vulnerable in their home network. Some software they're running in their home network, and they're able to laterally move on their home network from this vulnerable device to their corporate-owned laptop that they were using at home. Maybe they were remote, or maybe they took their machine home for the day. But yeah, when I'm looking at the integrations that Oasis has, I'm seeing things on there. Sure, the cloud is on there, but also Slack is on there, right? Their GitHub is on there. Things that you interact with from endpoints. From the systems.
Yeah, think about GitHub. You gave it as an example. So we know that attackers are actively hunting NHIs, right? And their secrets. So they are 24/7 scanning keys, right? In GitHub, and you can have like your credential leak, and that's it. Like there are many cases where we detect those kind of things. So it's really, and I agree with Hans, like there are many things out there that can compromise and increase your attack surface. And the things that you mentioned, you like to see it in the pen test where you finding new NHIs. And it's funny because organizations are not even aware of what they have out there in terms of their NHI. So even if you want to protect them, like you don't even know what you have in your environment. That's another thing too.
Could I mention something about that? Just build on what Shahar has mentioned.
Yeah.
Not because I am in governance, right? Now I am in cybersecurity governance, and it makes me appreciate more the need for true visibility. Sometimes it's what you don't know, you don't see, doesn't hurt you. I think that's something we need to be very intentional about. Just the fact that we know how many of these accounts that we have, how many API connections are we sharing information with. I think going back to the basics in terms of understanding our inventory of what do we have that is connected. How are these sharing things? And that level of
assuming we have an inventory, right?
Well, at least trying, right, to understand how things connect. Because I think that from a governance perspective, you don't have the visibility over those things.
Yeah,
that's a disservice to the people or the processes we are trying to advance because they're going to fail. And it's a monumental task.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we hear it a lot that security is an afterthought, right? We first kind of taking on the new technology and kind of embedding that all over the place. And only then we think, okay, now we need to secure it. What are we going to do? So we saw it from moving from on-prem to cloud, and we see it now with the rise of AI and non-human identities. And I think it's a common kind of thing. And now we see more and more in terms, like I talked about governance, but like the first really stage, like Hans mentioned, is totally the visibility due to the fact that in order to manage them, you first need to know what you have to manage. So agree.
Yeah. Like imagine making a budget without any access to your transaction history, right? What you spent money on. Like it's true. And, across any tools that you look at, whether it's an identity tool like Oasis or a vulnerability management tool or a SIM or, security operations, any of this stuff, it all starts with some kind of inventory, some kind of knowledge of what you have so that you can then prioritize that, understand where the risk is. And Hans, with data especially, can be very difficult to inventory what data you have, where it is, what identities are touching it, how it's moving, understanding that data flow, putting together a diagram even of that. But yeah, it seems like so much of this work is really just collecting data and understanding it.
Yeah, and I think that we can see that many organizations are also trying to do it themselves. They're building a homegrown kind of inventory per application or a tool or a cloud kind of um, source that they have, and they're trying to gather all this information. So it's not necessarily means that you have to have a tool in order to have visibility, but in some cases we see that even with the tools that you're using to provision identities, you lack visibility. For example,
Right.
SAS tokens, you can't see them within Azure, for example. So even if you want to have all the visibility in the world, it's really hard to gather everything in a single kind of pane of glass. So
Yeah. Yeah. So we actually have a good question that I think, Shahar, you might be the best to answer this, but we got another question in. Let me scroll up here. That's a long one. Can you give an example of what you mean when you say protect GitLab or any CI/CD platform? What is DevOps doing, and how does that affect the devs? I assume they mean how does whatever this protection is, how does that affect the developers? Does that make sense, Shahar?
is this for me? Yeah.
Yeah. Can you give an example of what you mean when you say protect GitLab or any CI/CD platform?
Yeah, so basically, let's say like we're detecting and securing basically the NHIs. And if we see that we can see that there are leaked credentials, we raise alerts for users in order for them to get visibility, and we help them to remediate those kind of security issues. So it's not only for GitHub, but in general, like we track anomaly detections and those behavior of the usage of
Right.
the specific identities. For every identity that is being created, there is a business justification, and why you gave those type of permissions, right, to the specific identity, and why. And we track those usages to see whether there are abnormal behaviors. And when we detect those, then we can share it with our users to make sure that they protect and minimize the risk to make sure that it's being protected. So we have several ways to kind of interact with the users and share all kind of different security aspects in terms of um, um, the security aspect of it, and they can choose whether they want to consume it from the tool itself or who are the teams that are going to manage the remediation and share it back to those teams. So we have those type of processes using any type of system of their choice to kind of alert on that, whether it's a SIM or ticketing systems that they are using or just notifications and so on. So
and I think that's a great opportunity to segue into talking about some of the common mistakes with NHIs. And I think one of those is actually the last one I was going to bring up. But I've already mentioned penetration testing, and the first thing I'm going to do with an NHI when penetration testing is see what it gives me access to. If it gives me access to data, I'm going to grab all that data, right? And that should look. Hopefully that should look pretty obvious. That should look very different from the normal use of that NHI, right, Shahar?
Yeah. So I think when talking about the common mistakes, basically I think that first of all, the organizations are lacking even best practices. They don't even know what are the best practices in order to secure identity. So I don't think they're doing any kind of mistake. It's just kind of happened through the fact that first you don't know what you don't know in your environment, and then they're also like over permissioned, right? As you mentioned, there are many identities that are stale or orphan, and they just sit there and waiting for someone to delete
Right.
them.
Or
there are
misused them.
exactly. Think about people that are leaving the company, for example, employee that was offboarded with his human, like the human identity in the HR system. They're cutting all the connections and activities of that user, right? What happened with all the secrets and credentials that this user was exposed to, right? So you never know. Think about doing a third-party kind of assessment with some vendors, right? When you want to buy a tool, so you get all those POCs with different companies, and usually they're using a non-human identity to allow you to log into their environment, to your environment, and you chose only one of them, and then you said goodbye to all the rest. What happened with the connectivity? Who do you know how many organizations just have access to third parties that are just out there, and they can use your data and just you're exposed. So and if their organization of those vendors is attacked, so you're also exposed because they have access to your organization. So those are a lot of common mistakes that we see, and I think that like misconfigurations, as we mentioned, and list privileges that are not being tracked, it's also something that is commonly happen in organizations. So I think that best practices are not in the awareness on how to use identities and how to track them, how to govern them. What are the best practices for that? And I think the visibility aspect is also something that needs to be in place in order to do that. So,
yeah.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think we have some things we can learn from how we've been tracking some think about user behavior analytics applied to identities, right? So we know that, I don't have access to that specific the HR server. I don't have a reason for it, but, due to my compromise of my account, it could be a compromised NHI account. That should be caught somewhere in governance. Something needs to bring a red flag, because I think those best practices that apply to human behavior, I am on vacation, I'm accessing a system that is something I don't usually do. That should, in a zero trust environment, it should either block or bring an alert. The same could be applied to non-human identities, I believe, because the speed in which those things could be weaponized or exploited, we have not necessarily seen. We've seen the tip of the iceberg, I believe. Just not necessarily switching topics here, but if that happens, non-human identities are going to be used to attack enterprises, agentic AI that weaponize the speed in which those and resources they can leverage to impact our systems. There's going to be exponential. So we need to identify that early in the process. Whenever it could be a mistake that was done, a costly mistake, because we sometimes, to the reference we made here, we are going to grant some, in some cases, what we call it, Shahar mentioned this before, where these operations are going to happen with some level of trust. They're going to be accessing sensitive data. They're going to be making those connections. And if something goes wrong, it's going to go wrong really bad, really fast.
Yeah, and I really want to add one more thing about it. Hans just mentioned operational, and I think there is the security aspect, but there is also the operational continuity when we talk about non-human identities, because today we have identities that has credentials, and they have, for example, a secret with expiration date, right? And suddenly the secret is expired because you're not tracking it, and you have outage, and you need to, you have downtime, or suddenly something is not working internally, and you have those outages within your organization. So it's not only from the security side but it's also from the operational perspective and the operational continuity of your organization that sometimes can cost you even more when it happens than a security issue. So it's also important to mention that aspect when managing non-human identities.
Yeah. Yeah, and you mentioned a lot of good things here. Shahar, especially the example of the proof of concept that never gets fully removed. I put together a report for a vendor I was working for 2 or 3 years ago, and we found in 100% of the cases and the data that we had, somebody had done that. 100% of the cases, and not only done that, but this was non-human identity that had access tenant-wide. So like if you're using Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace, this one identity had full read access to all email, full read write to everyone's calendar, and full read write to everyone's files in the whole organization, right? Like that's a crazy amount of access to just leave lying around and to not revoke that. And I think is a great example. If somebody wants to understand how bad this is in the enterprise, if you want like a personal example, if you've had a Google account for a long time, like I have, my Google accounts existed as long as Gmail has been a thing. If you've never gone to audit what you've given access to your Google account, it's going to look crazy. You're going to be like, why does MySpace have read access to my email, right? Like, does MySpace even still exist? That doesn't even make sense. You're going to find all kinds of crazy stuff in there. If you go and audit some of your personal accounts, it might be Facebook, might be Google, Microsoft, whatever you use for like single sign-on, or, maybe you wanted to integrate something to unsubscribe you from newsletters, right? Like there's all this stuff that we add and we never go back and revoke it after the fact.
That's true.
You put a scary thought on me. It's been a while since but I do agree. We going back to the visibility we need to govern those type of identities, to those type of connections, and point taking. We sometimes the convenience of saying yes, I want to connect this, and then we never go back to revisit, and that's just becomes a legacy connection that someday could be weaponized against because it has access to our information. And this is a personal example, but it could be a system, and a system that has persistent access to something that's not even used. So again, going back to, if we understand those identities and how they should behave, we can also monitor, hey, this account has not access or has not had any movement in the last 6 months. Who owns it? We need to decommission it. And if we go a step further, automating that process, if this has not been used, it has not been sharing data, somebody should just, I'm not saying take it off, but find a way that somebody owns it. And that's a different discussion. I think it's just the way how do we manage the process for managing identities, granting access to identities, or creating identities. It's not quite automated to the point it should be. And that's yet another problem.
And it's interesting because in consumer stuff, we've actually seen a pretty good job done here in like iOS and Android. Sometimes your phone will pop up and say, hey, this application has microphone access but hasn't used this privilege in 3 months. We're going to turn it off. We're going to disable it. Like worst case scenario, you can always re-enable it later if you need to use it. It'll pop up and say, hey, do you want to approve for this app to use your microphone? But I love the idea that at the consumer level, some of the stuff is going in and saying, you're not even using this. So why don't we revoke this level of access? So for people who do want to check it out, if you do a search for Google Security Checkup, you'll find the page, and you'll be able to see there how many third-party connections you have into your Google account. I don't know what it is for the other ones because I'm just very deep into the Google ecosystem, but I would recommend checking that out if you don't do that already on a regular basis. I think this is maybe a good metaphor for what you're doing with Oasis, right, Shahar?
Yeah, definitely. I think that what you mentioned about revoking access, it's something that organizations are sometimes afraid because they're afraid to break things, right?
Right.
So, like, this is what's stepping out of the way of rotating credentials and disabling identities because you say, "Oh my God, what have I done?" And we saw many breakage along the way. So I think it's not only of what you need to do, but also how you do it. You need to have the full context of the consumption of that identity and to understand who is owning that to verify, as Hans mentioned, that this is actually not in use. And we also know that there are many processes in organization that runs internally once every 6 months, every year. So even if you put a policy in place that says like identities are defined as stale or no longer needed after 180 days, sometimes you can still have something that you're not aware of, that by disabling this identity can break things internally. So I think that that's the something that we see a lot in organizations where they have some sort of they're scared to do that. And
what is the fix for that though? How do we? And maybe this is more of a Hans question, but is that a cultural thing? Is that a leadership thing where we have to accept, okay, some breakage might occur if we're trying to keep that? How do we fix the culture of don't touch it, you might break something?
I think it's a cultural because it's not well, there are some challenges with technology too, but think about companies that grew by acquisition, or we were just discussing this earlier. Somebody buys a company, and they're not necessarily understanding, or they don't have some people don't stay. There is some
that institutional knowledge, right?
Yes, the institutional knowledge goes away, and sometimes you have to keep those systems, and you don't understand. I've seen it many times. So you don't understand what is this for, because there is the person who created is not longer with the company.
Unplug it, see what breaks.
and
that's how you find
that's
out.
a painful way to do it, and I've seen how that breaks a lot of things. But I think it's just in terms of culture, we're trying to keep the lights on, and that's not necessarily a concern because it's working. Nobody has anything. But again, I think that's the IAM's team's prerogative, I guess, to question those things in the appropriate way. There are many ways to do it other than just disabling it, right? But I think we hoard a lot of those accounts, those connections, and nobody is necessarily his job is to question why.
Yeah.
And I think that's a cultural shift. And I think we need to start asking those questions because in the velocity that we are going to be ingesting these non-human accounts it's going to be overwhelming. And at some point...
and we see also, I agree with you. Like we see also organizations that just do a scream test, right? Like we're shutting it down and we'll see if someone screams and then we put it back up,
scream
right?
Test. I like that.
Yeah, so there are those kind of agendas as well. And I think that once you decided to go and manage, then you have to define a policy in your organization, and everyone should follow through those policies and governance aspects. And sometimes things can break, but it's better to be secure than breaking something that you can fix fast when you have the ownership and the context around the identity, right? So it's really...
I think it's also a process issue.
Go ahead.
Just saying, one of the last examples I've seen is if it's a process, when those things are created, there is no context around what they are for. So if in those cases, we could have just added the time to say, this is for this, the documentation. How many times we've heard, there's no good documentation when programmers don't do documentation very well. But we also in the business or in IT don't do very well documenting things or assigning ownership. It's just somebody created it for a ticket. Nobody owns that. Nobody knows how to trace it back to even ask the right questions. So it's
Usually
not
the
necessarily
owner is the one that created the identity, right?
yeah,
Like you
right,
created
right,
thousands
yeah,
of
and then I
identities.
retired later, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so the irony is like if you look at really resilient organizations, like Netflix created an entire software suite that exists just to break things in creative ways, right? On purpose. Because if you understand all the ways that a thing can break, then you can be resilient. Then you can make a plan to make sure that it doesn't break. So I think that's the irony in, don't touch it, it might break. Like those organizations are going to be the most fragile and the most unprepared.
Right.
That's what I mentioned. It was cultural. Because if a company has the culture to say we're going to challenge that assumption, then I think they're going to be better prepared they're going to identify those processes to inform people, so people can think of, oh, I need to do this, or, there's a life cycle for this account to expire, or if this application no longer exists, we identified everything is associated with it, so we clean it completely instead of just lingering around.
Shahar, earlier you've mentioned best practices a few times, and I want to give you a chance to talk about provisioning a bit as well, and the best practices around provisioning, because that's really like it's a different problem to go find all the old identities and tackle that problem. But and you tell me if you agree or not, but I think one of the first things you have to do is make sure to stop the bad practices. Right. And all the new non-human identities you create are done well. So help me understand some of those best practices there.
Okay. So we have actually, as you mentioned, the brown field, we call it, and the green field, right? You have the issues that were already created, the identities that are already created, and the issues around them. And those you want to see, secure, and govern, right? You want to be able to review, as we mentioned, the inventory, to prioritize according to the risk, and to start remediate issues to secure your environment. The green field is before you create the identity, what is your strategy? Like, how do you do provisioning today? And we see organizations that are more mature, they have really good automations to kind of provision the identity themselves, or they use Terraforms, and they do all these kind of cool things. But really the best practice when you create the identity is to put all the governance pieces around it from the get-go. And what does it mean? Creating an identity with no ownership, with clear owner on the identity, is not a best practice, actually, because then if you have a breach and you don't know who to go to, the time to remediate is really longer than you have on that. Also, if you want to take action and you want to verify it with the owner, or you want the owner to do this action on top of the identity to revoke, to remove privileges, or to revoke access, or to do any certification campaign, right, for auditors, then you have to have an owner that can adhere to those processes. The second thing is enforce rotation policy, right? If rotation is being fully automated on top of the created identity, then you don't have to have, you're preventing the issues such as unrotated credentials, and you're kind of governing it from the get-go. So ownership, the privileges, so you can the business justification attached into it, right? And the thing is that you can prevent a lot of issues from occurring, but the lifecycle keeps on going. Even if you create the identity automated with all the best practices around it, with all the information and governance and guardrails, Identities can still be stale, right? And you need to delete them. You can still have roles or scopes or permission changes on those identities where you want to manage them. You can still have breaches, although it's clearly rotated every X days, right? And the identity is fully governed. But then you have much more tools, visibility, and context to mitigate the problem with a minimum time to value. So I think you have, like, organizations have a two-way strategy. One is how you review everything you have in your stack today and get a full inventory and review all of your identities and securing them, and prioritize it, of course, because you can't resolve everything. But also in terms of provisioning, how you do it, and govern it from the get-go with adding all those guardrails from the beginning. Even putting the secrets in a vault of your choice, which is something that we, of course, in Oasis, we automate this process for you. So we create the identity, create the secret, we store it in a vault, we assign an owner, and you cannot create the identity if you don't have all of those governance pieces around it. So the identity is being created with an owner, it's being rotated from the get-go. You have the secret stored in a vault of your choice. So all of those aspects are a big component of preventing many, many issues from occurring during the life cycle of the identity, and also help you with scalability when you go to do other processes of lifecycle management, such as recertification campaigns, as we mentioned, decommissioning identities, privileges, hygiene of your environment, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds, yeah, it sounds, to what Hans was saying, like one of the reasons we don't do documentation is it sucks. We don't like to do it. Like nobody likes to document. Most people don't like to document things. I like to document things. But then it has to be maintained. Like the moment you document it, documentation can go out of date very quickly. It can become less useful once it's no longer accurate or out of date. And right. But a lot of what you're saying, Shahar, it's just making me think that a big piece of this is automation. Is if we could automatically create that documentation, that record, that who created it, where they created it, what they created it for, those details that we're going to need when an incident pops up and we need to find that NHI owner, is going to save us so much time, right? But just sounds like a lot of automation to solve some of these problems, because it's pretty simple at the time that you create it to document some of those things, and a lot of it can be just automatically produced, I would think.
Yeah. First, automation is a huge part of it because it saves you the time of all your manual effort, and you can just go ahead and fix issues or do something else. But moreover, as I mentioned, the problem can still occur, even if you have the best automation. I think one of the things that are we see like as the top of mind in order to resolve things is ownership, where we help detect those as well. Also for already created identities, we kind of help you digest information and assign a specific owner for those existing identities. And also the context, right? You can go and have an inventory from any tool, but to track the consumers who is using the identity, and see the full picture of their resources and the ownership part, this full context gives you the trust in order to go ahead and not afraid to break anything, right? So the automation side of things can really help you with governance from the get-go and prevention, but it's not going to resolve all your problems if you don't have the full context when you want to act on something. So I think that's the other aspect to consider. When you see an identity and you see its name, you don't know who is using that. You don't know if it's in if it has secrets active or not. How many? Maybe it ties into multiple secrets, and that's not a best practice, right? So I think the visibility and the context piece gives you another kind of courage to go ahead and delete the identity or take any action. Yeah.
A lot of these, like in the cloud, you can tag things for a lot of credentials and a lot of systems. You can say what the purpose of the credential is in there, and in so many cases, like nobody's taking advantage of those note fields. Like it's just somebody just types in password there. That's not useful. You could have put some documentation right there where the credential lives. Like that's documentation too. All the tagging and descriptions.
The tagging are such a huge data source, like for enrichment for non-human identities. Like I totally agree with you. We can detect ownership from their usage, like many things, like who are the teams that are owning that, right? Like everything is being tagged because this is the policy in the organization, right?
Yeah. So we've got a few minutes. Hans, I want to get some final thoughts from you. And then Shahar, I'm going to come back to you to learn a little bit more about Oasis.
Sure.
All right. As I think back about not only what is happening, but also what I think is going to come, I agree with you, Adrian. Automation is the solution. It's exciting. It's also, for those of us who are overthinking how this could go wrong, I think it's also, we see some of the challenges.
Terrifying?
Think about, I wouldn't put the word terrifying because I want to be optimist about it. But think about agentic AI. We're just seeing the beginning. Like all what we know so far is exciting, but it's also, we're at the cusp of autonomous AI capabilities to make some decisions. Think about the machine-to-machine communication protocols in MCP. The Model Context Protocol is one of them, right? We're starting to see the trust we're putting into these identities and these processes that are going to be doing things on our behalf. And it's exciting in one way because we see the benefits and the possibilities, but at the same time, I'm not necessarily always have this mindset, but I always see how this could be turned in its head. How can this be used for nefarious
That's part of our
purpose?
job. Yeah.
Right? And that's the scary part.
We have to think that way.
And because of that, I think we as let's say, information security practitioners or business users, we need to start asking the right questions. We need to Shahar's point earlier, we need to think of security as part of the added benefit of deploying these technologies. And I want to encourage everybody to ask the question. If you don't see let's say a security or IT representative in the project when you're talking about this, or your business is, maybe it's on you to ask, do we have somebody representing this team? Because I think in many cases, like it has happened to me, is lack of visibility. We learned when they already signed the contract, is in half implementation, and then we ask questions like, did you know this is not, doesn't do this or cannot be done to secure an identity? And it's too late. You're not going to tell the business, no, you cannot use this anymore.
Right.
So,
yeah. Good stuff. Shahar, 1 minute. Tell us a little bit about Oasis. Sorry, not a lot of time left. We're almost out.
No worries. I think I mentioned most of it. At Oasis, we help you to see, secure, and govern at all aspects. We also meet the customers where they are. There are more mature customers with processes built in, so we incorporate into their tech stack and technology and help them kind of utilize Oasis through their own IAM tools or any solutions that they have. And basically, I think that we help customers to create those best practices, those governance aspects internally in their organization. We build it together with them. And by using Oasis, they can fully automate the lifecycle management and have the full visibility and context and get the trust to take actions, both in the security aspect of things and also from the governance side and the posture risk and the posture and compliance auditing and so on. So I think, in terms of AI, it's also a big thing for us where we help customers when they incorporate this new technology, how to mitigate those risks associated with AIs. And yeah, I think that's it.
Excellent. I thank you so much, Shahar and Hans, for joining me today. This is a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For having us.
And big thanks to our sponsor, Oasis, for making today's webcast possible. And finally, a big thanks to the audience for being here, for asking questions. We'll see you next time.
Bye.